This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. Confused by developments in Georgia State Court, Georgia Federal Court, what each of the 19 co-conspirators are doing in Fani Willis's criminal prosecution of Donald Trump and all of his henchmen? Come to Legal AF to understand. We just did, Ben Meiselas and me, sitting in for Karen Friedman-Ignifilo, we just did an entire segment on Legal AF, the leading podcast on law and politics, about what's happening in Georgia. Find out who's moving to sever and get out of the case, who's trying to get to federal court, what's going on with the table for two prosecution and trial of Ken Chesbro and Sidney Powell that starts in less than 3 weeks. What about the rest of the trials? When is Donald Trump going? And what does it mean that these first set of trials is going first in a conspiracy case involving 19 people? How do you try a case like that? Tune into Legal AF, watch the clip of Ben and me now, and hopefully you'll walk away with some learning in that area. There you go. Let's keep talking about criminal stuff. Let's go to Georgia and do some updates there, both in the state court, which every day increasingly looks like is going to be the only forum for these lawsuits. We reported a month ago or 3 weeks ago with all these filings of attempts to drag the case over to federal court. If Jeff Clark and Mark Meadows had their way, who were in at least the executive branch, the entire case, we thought, based on their filings, they were going to argue needed to be brought to federal court, not just their own personal case. And we did some reporting on that. But fortunately, neither Jeff Clark nor Mark Meadows nor their lawyers are making any legal arguments that have any merit to them, nor are they handling their hearings properly, and they're going to be on the receiving end of losses. We've already reported on Mark Meadows testifying because he felt he had to carry his burden, which of course he had, to convince the federal judge that his case belonged in federal court, and it went terribly for Mark Meadows. Most of what he said in open court under oath will be used against him in the criminal cases that are against him, and that was not worth doing if I were him. Jeff Clark, the former number 5 on the totem pole, one of 10 assistant attorney generals who got elevated through the ranks in the waning days, the last gasp of the Trump administration, because he told Trump what he wanted to hear, and wrote that now infamous letter that's all part of the Jan 6 investigation and all the indictments, which was he was going to send out on letterhead a letter that said the Department of Justice has grave doubts about the election process in your state, and to try to delay the certification process to buy Donald Trump and Team Crazy more time. And he tried to argue, I was just doing my job as a lawyer in the Department of Justice. And so he goes into court, does not testify because he sees it goes terribly for Meadows. So he tries to submit 2 affidavits, right, which can't be cross-examined. They're just pieces of paper signed under penalties of perjury. One from 91-year-old Ed Meese. Most people thought Ed Meese was no longer here, but he was the attorney general who had to step down in disgrace under the Reagan administration. So a disgraced Federalist Society Heritage Foundation board member, Ed Meese, has an affidavit ghostwritten for him telling the Judge Jones how the Department of Justice works. Not necessarily the job of Jeff Clark, but how the Justice Department works. And then they send in another affidavit for Jeff Clark. He doesn't testify. So, Ben, why don't you take it from there? What happens to the 2 pieces of key evidence that his lawyer uses? And then we can talk about where we think Judge Jones is going to end up on this.
Well, you shouldn't commit malpractice when you go to a hearing like that, especially one that's going to be covered by all of the media. The failure to present live witnesses for a hearing involving live witnesses resulted in federal Judge Jones striking the affidavits that were submitted on behalf of Jeffrey Clark. Not only that, but the lawyer for Jeffrey Clark had to scramble during the hearing to try to avoid being sanctioned by even requesting the waiver of Jeffrey Clark's appearance, which he didn't file and didn't understand, apparently, the federal rules of civil procedure like this. And so a point of practice here and a very basic point of practice would be maybe you reach out to, if you had any doubts about what the judge was expecting, the default would always be you have live witness testimony. So for you to just presume as a lawyer that you're going to show up in federal court at an adversarial mini trial type hearing with just affidavits that can't be cross-examined, not the brightest thing to do. But if you had any doubts, I think I'd reach out to the clerk just as a practice pointer and say, hey, they expecting live witnesses? Or maybe you reach out to opposing counsel, come up with a stipulation. And if there isn't a stipulation, you bring your witnesses there. But this is the type of litigation tactics, Popok, we're very used to with MAGA. And I'll say it's different. At least Mark Meadows, lawyer, did a good job. Mark Meadows did a horrific job and destroyed it and torpedoed it. And it was an uphill battle for Mark Meadows, lawyer there. But Meadows testified horribly, but the lawyer at least framed the issue
with
as
one
best
exception.
as you could frame it.
With one exception. I agree with you on Meadows, with one exception. When his lawyer Terwilliger asked him under oath in a direct question, not cross-examination by the prosecutor, were you involved with any aspect of the organizing or coordinating the fake or alternate electors? He got an answer, and the answer was no. Not, I can't remember, maybe, I don't know, no. And all Fani Willis had to do was pull out emails that were reported in the Jan 6 report, exactly the opposite, and show that he perjured himself. How do you as a lawyer allow your client to, how do you not know about, at least, if you don't know it's buried in the evidence already that's been presented, how do you not know it's in the Jan 6 report under the chapter about Georgia, about your client and that email and the electoral and the fake electors? That's malpractice.
Well, we could even go a step further and to say putting Mark Meadows on the stand in the first place. Even if Mark Meadows says, I'm taking the stand, you may, as a lawyer, say, I'm withdrawing. If you're taking the stand, I'm withdrawing because you're about to incriminate yourself.
Right.
But to be fair, I think the lawyer rehearsed that question with Mark Meadows because the lawyer is known as being diligent. Because Mark Meadows and these MAGA Republicans live in this extrajudicial right-wing echo chamber where they just lie to everybody, and whether it's Hannity or Laura Ingraham, whoever, they go, okay, and there's no pushback. Their stories are so all over the place that it's very confusing for them. And I just think that
he lost the continuity. He lost the continuity of his own story.
He lost the continuity of his own story. He lied. And then I'm sure the lawyer was like, oh, crap, that's going to come back and harm us. You shouldn't have testified. But going to Jeff Clark, the affidavits were stricken. So that evidence doesn't come in. And not only does that net evidence come in, you now have Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, and I'll toss it back to you, Popok, who was so prepared with the perfect witness
Jody
to
Hunt.
provide admissible evidence.
Yeah. And one, let me bring Ben back. Salty. I know. Let me ask you a question, because I like this back and forth. Sometimes you and I do our own sort of monologues. We stitch it together, but sometimes we do this interactive thing, which I like. I think the audience does too sometimes. One of the other screw-ups by Harry, not the Harry that we like on the network, Harry McDougald, who represented Clark, is he didn't even know the basic timeline for the now infamous letter. And so the judge did the cross-examination of him. Not, you're in bad shape when the judge knows your case better than you. And he said, well, the letter that we're talking about on DOJ letterhead claiming that there was election fraud that your client prepared, was that done? And this is the judge examining him. Was that done? Was that letter created before or after your client met with Donald Trump? And he said, I don't know. And he said, isn't it more likely that the letter was done first and that got the attention of Donald Trump, this lower level attorney general, and that's how it happened? And he didn't even know his own timeline. And so when they were trying to pin the tail on Donald Trump, that Trump ordered him to do the letter, the judge was like, Well, I don't even think Trump knew who your guy was until he wrote the letter. I mean, that's just unforced errors. It was sad to watch. Don't you assume? We'll talk about what's going to happen with Jody. Oh, well, let me do the Jody Hunt thing. I think that's where you're going next.
Well, yeah.
So,
But first off, just to respond there,
sure.
McDougal then became essentially the witness because he didn't have any witnesses, and there was no admissible evidence. So then all the judge had was to basically ask questions of the lawyer, and then the lawyer stepped in as the proxy for the client. Now, the lawyer was still making arguments. It's not admissible evidence per se, but it certainly colors the existing evidence that was introduced by the state, by Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. So when the lawyer got frazzled and confused and didn't know how to respond and essentially started making admissions that were very damaging to Donald Trump, Trump's lawyer, Steve Sadow, was sitting in the crowd, and people said that you heard him just, blurt out, "Oh shit, this is bad for us.
This isn't good.
This isn't good." And it wasn't. And it also just goes to show you, because going into that hearing, I thought Clark was going to not prevail, although I thought if Clark's lawyers framed it intelligently, at least you could make this argument. You and I talked about it. There's this case involving an 11th Circuit an FBI agent who bribed people. And the 11th Circuit said that that was within the color of the FBI agent's duty for purposes of removal, where a bribe takes place because FBI agents, as part of their job, sometimes have to pay off informants. So I was thinking to myself, well, if the FBI bribe could somehow be construed as part of a federal authority, maybe Jeff Clark writing an unlawful memo, one can make the argument that that's like the FBI agent. But then the lawyer didn't make that argument, and the lawyer didn't understand the law or the facts, and really made a horrible record for appeal as well.
Yeah,
so
we always thought that the person with the best chance of trying to get the case to federal court was Jeff Clark. But as you just pointed out, in the hands of a mumbling, bumbling attorney, no evidence, no testimony by Jeff Clark. And then Fani Willis, once again, anticipating and counterpunching, brings in Jody Hunt. Now, people might be saying, Jody Hunt, I know who that is. That is the lawyer that Cassidy Hutchinson, who we're going to talk about later in the Rudy Giuliani segment, hired after she fired the Trump-appointed lawyer when she was talking to the Jan 6 committee, when that Trump-appointed lawyer told her to basically lie and not remember certain things that she remembered as Mark Meadows' assistant. She hired Jody Hunt. Jody Hunt had been in the Trump Department of Justice, in the job that Jeff Clark got for about 10 minutes towards the end of Donald Trump's tenure, which was the head of the civil division of the Department of Justice. Jeff Clark moved up like 5 ranks in like the last 3 weeks. He was even, according to the Jan 6 committee, offered the actual acting attorney general role. This was an environmental lawyer that should have been nowhere near the White House, by the way, who Donald Trump fell in love with because he would do whatever he said he was going to do. But Jody Hunt said, I had that job just before Jeff Clark. And the job description that they're offering for that job is wrong. The only departments of the Department of Justice that would have been responsible for an election interference issue is 2 of them, and they're not named the civil division. It's the civil rights division, which would have dealt with voting rights, and the criminal division, which would have dealt with election interference and crimes. In other words, not my job. Not my job description, not what he should have been doing. And if he was doing things as either the head of the environmental resource management department or even the civil department for 10 seconds, he was rogue, outside his scope of his work. I'm telling you that as Jody Hunt. Jody Hunt is an impressive person. He's the go-to white-collar defense lawyer now in Washington. He was Cassidy Hutchinson's lawyer. I'm sure it was a powerful moment when he testified, and will win the day ultimately. One last thing before we move on to our next segment, Ben. What do you think about how Scott McAfee, the judge who's going to be the judge over all 19. It's obvious now. How did you think he handled the grand jury issue and the other motions that the defense is scrambling to make, including motions to dismiss that Donald Trump has joined in Georgia?
I think Judge McAfee is, again, look, McAfee's appointed by Republican Governor Brian Kemp. Let's just start with that premise. But he is a law and order judge. He hasn't made a single ruling that I've disagreed with. You mentioned, for example, Ken Chesbrough wants to probe a conspiracy that grand jurors were being threatened or intimidated and bullied into their position. I think it is appropriate if that is an issue that, fundamentally, well, I think Chesbrough engaged in criminal conduct. I think that he has, as part of his Sixth Amendment rights and his other due process rights, speedy trial, get this information, immediately. And I think the judge put the perfect kind of parameters on what that looks like. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis can be present when that takes place. The questions will not veer out into any ways to intentionally try to create taint. And, I think that issue's been handled perfectly. I think he handled efficiently sending out subpoenas to the potential voir dire pool, the potential jury pool, get that out right away. I think his decision, although as many of us would like that Trump trial to start October 23 as well, I think Judge McAfee made the right call to preserve the due process rights of all of the remaining co-defendants outside of those that invoke their right to a speedy trial, moving those to a later date, but inviting anybody, you want to join the October 23rd trial, you are free to join it if you want to. I like that he kind of rejected all of the nonsense regarding the special purpose grand jury and kind of getting into those conspiracy theories. I think he's like, that's nothing that we need to get involved in right now, and the next thing I'm interested in seeing is how he's going to handle the state version of what we've been referring to as Garcia hearings at the federal level that special counsel Jack Smith has sought regarding the conflicts of interest, where all of these MAGA defendants are like all represented by the same people, right? So at the federal level, Donald Trump was paying for all these Donald Trump's political action committee was paying for the lawyers for witnesses and co-defendants and all of that. And then there were witnesses who were going to testify against co-defendants. So Jack Smith wanted to hold a hearing, and that's still pending before Judge Eileen Cannon there. It takes her a very long time to, rule on things. And we learned today, one of the interesting things, like people like Lynn Wood is a cooperating witness, MAGA Republican Lynn Wood from the Georgia area, is a cooperating witness working with the prosecution and working with Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. But Fani Willis requested a state version of a Garcia hearing, pointing out the conflicts of interest, because a lot of these witnesses and co-defendants were all paid for by whether it was Trump's political organization or the Republican Party or other groups. That creates a lot of conflicts there. And this is here's the thing. Jack Smith, very surgical in the cases he brought because he wanted to avoid all of these issues. But Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, while casting a broad brush and being far more aggressive, she's managing this. I can't emphasize enough. It impresses me beyond impressing me what she's doing right now, managing this. And same thing about Judge McAfee. This is truly a lesson in how a court manages an efficient docket right here. I am thoroughly impressed at all of the moves.
Well, one of the things I think is going really well is that Fani Willis does have, I'm sure, the professional respect of Scott McAfee. They work together. They worked in the Fulton County District Attorney's office. He worked under her, not when she was the DA, but when she was the head of the this litigation department within it. He knows that there's two people in that room at any given moment who know procedure and have good judgment about Georgia criminal practice. That's Scott McAfee, as we've outlined today, even though he's new on the bench. And it's Fani Willis. Who it's not is all the other people that you identified, this various groups of people, including Donald Trump's new lawyer. I mean, he went out of his way to fire Drew Little, hashtag $1 billion, whatever. And he hires Steve
Drew Fielding.
Drew Fielding, sorry.
Look, because Jennifer Little's the co-counsel.
Right, I put him together. Drew Little, right? His colleague was named Little. And he hired Steve Sadow, who at the time, Karen Friedman-Agnifilo, our colleague, said, he's got a good reputation. That's a good addition to the team. And so far, all he's done is file literally one-line motions that say, hey, everything that Ken Chesebro just filed, including all his crazy motions to dismiss that are going to go down in flames in front of Judge McAfee, I adopt. Me too. I'll have what he's having. Every time. Ken Chesebro has filed 5 motions to dismiss, including parts of it that actually undermine Donald Trump's case. Because the heart of Ken Chesebro's motion to dismiss the indictment is that I never told everybody to use the fake electors, the alternate electors, if there wasn't a valid court challenge. You're only supposed to break the glass and use them in that emergency. Otherwise, you're never supposed to have the contingent electors. And the problem is that there was no valid legal challenge, and that's not how the contingent electors were used in the hands of Donald Trump, Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, and Peter Navarro. They were used as phony electors sent in to the National Archive and to Mike Pence, and apparently in Georgia to the chief judge of the Northern District of Georgia for whatever reason, because they wanted them recognized as the true electors. And that undermines, again, and that's going to happen time and time again. As you've said, Ben, and I agree with you, that if Fani wins in October into November, with Sidney Powell and Ken Chesebro, you'll hear the flipping. It'll sound like the International House of Pancakes, all the other co-defendants who are going to flip. If they stay in the case because they're MAGA to the core, and they want to protect their cult leader, there's going to be inconsistent testimony and evidence among all these people that Donald Trump won't be able to coordinate. And that's the problem. But for Steve Sadow to come in late in the case and just file not even his own standalone motion to dismiss the indictment, which I guess is coming at some point, but just saying, me too, I like with Ken Chesebro. I'll follow Ken Chesebro again, just like I followed him into the indictment. And Sidney Powell, I'll adopt hers too, her motion to dismiss, because it really went well for me when I followed her the last time. I mean, it's just incredible. There you have Ben and me, just like we do every Saturday on Legal AF, breaking down the top stories, the new breaking news, exploding it in front of you, putting it back together, using our 70 years of collective experience between me, Karen Friedman-Agnifilo, and Ben Meiselas, the leaders of Legal AF, to hopefully bring you facts, not fiction, blow no smoke or sunshine, and do it in a way that's at least marginally entertaining. We do it on that show Wednesdays and Saturdays on the MeidasTouch Network. Free subscribe. Help them get to 2 million. They're so close. The bigger they are, the more your voice is heard. That's where we are on the MeidasTouch Network. Go over to MeidasTouch.com. You can find all our content written, oral, verbal, video, you name it. It's all sitting there. I'm getting a little punchy at the end of this. I don't know why. But until the next hot take and my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Hey, Meidas Mighty. Love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.